Welcome back, wise guys. Spread out! Let's finish discussing the Three Stooges 1960s feature films today, shall we? In the intro video, we talked about Stop, Look, and Laugh, which is just kind of its own animal as a compilation film. Doesn't really fit in with the others, so therefore it couldn't really be ranked or assessed alongside them, but it was worth talking about. The bottom of my list, the bloated and confused Snow White and the Three Stooges, which doesn't really seem to know what to do with the Stooges and instead focuses on Carol Heiss's Snow White and her ice skating routine. The first true blue Three Stooges starring feature vehicle have Rocket Will Travel, which does have some good parts and a couple great supporting cast members, but is let down by kind of a meandering, bizarre story that feels sort of pieced together from different narratives, and also has the worst juvenile leading man of all of their feature films. And lastly, Stooges in Orbit, which I found very polarizing, as it's pieced together from remnants from the Three Stooges scrapbook TV pilot, which is available in its entirety on this Blu-ray set, and then newly shot footage, and then some reshot footage from that pilot, and it doesn't meet up perfectly. It could have been, I think, rewritten and reworked a little bit more to be a little smoother, but it does have some very fun parts and a goofy, outlandish plot that kids are sure to love. Let's look at the other Three Stooges feature films today and see what they hold. The Stooges go around the world. In a boat? No. In a plane? No. In a daze. Coming up next on our list, the Three Stooges go around the world in a daze. A spoof of Around the World in 80 Days, of course, which had been adapted into a very successful Best Picture-winning feature film back in 1956. Now you might remember, if you've watched my channel for a while and you watched my Worst of Alfred Hitchcock, my thoughts on low-budget, globe-trotting comedies. Hitchcock's Rich and Strange fails to deliver on pretty much everything it tries to do. You can't make an around-the-world escapade on a shoestring budget and really try to immerse the audience in different cultures and different places. It just doesn't work. Thankfully, Stooges Go Around the World in a Daze doesn't do that. It understands its limitations, so it relies kind of on one large set piece for each major location. A palace in India, a boxing arena in California, that sort of thing, a swanky club in London. And honestly, for the movie it is, that approach works pretty well. It never tries to pretend it's something it's not, never tries to overdo it. Stooges Go Around the World in a Daze, like Stooges in Orbit, is kind of a divisive one. There are things that work really well and things that work really poorly. On the poorly side, we have the attempt to shoehorn in several classic Stooges routines. The maha aha routine is done in a longer form than it was in Three Little Pirates, but Curly Joe just can't quite capture Curly's take on it, I don't think. His feels a little more sluggish, a little more mundane, doesn't have that zing that it needs. He also does, whenever he hears Pop Goes the Weasel, he goes crazy. Now, admittedly, in the Stooges short Punch Drunks, Curly explains there's no reason why this happens. He becomes a world champion boxer the moment he hears that song and doesn't want to fight at all the moment it stops. But they kind of play into the mystery angle because it comes out of nowhere. But here, Curly Joe prefaces a scene by saying, "Larry, don't play Pop Goes the Weasel on that flute because I'll go crazy and start hitting people." And, you know, it's just rammed into the story. Doesn't work. It feels like a lame, tired rehash. You know, they were running out of ideas, so they just tried to repurpose a few things there. I don't care much for that. The juvenile couple here is okay. They're not the worst we've had or the best that we'll get. But they do their purpose. I recognize Jay Sheffield from several appearances on Hogan's Heroes. So, I mean, that was, I guess, a little plus. The real casting highlight here, besides the Stooges, of course, who are good in all of their feature films, has to be Peter Forster as the evil Vickers Cavendish, this big-time London con man out to make sure that the descendant of the great Phileas Fogg is not able to go around the world in 80 days again, by adding an extra stipulation to that. Can you go around the world in 80 days without spending a farthing? That sort of thing. It's a really clever twist on the story, you know. Could you just kind of bluff and sneak and steal your way across the entire globe? It's a good idea. I like what they did with it. And Peter Forster's really good as this slimy con man. Today, of course, we'd probably remember him best as the priest in Father Goose. But I like him here. He has good chemistry with the Stooges, and also good chemistry with Walter Burke, who plays his Cockney henchman. We talked about him last week when we reviewed All the King's Men, where he pops up as Broderick Crawford's bodyguard who stammers. They're really good in this. They know exactly what kind of movie they're doing. They get in on the slapstick. It's really good stuff. And I wish they'd done more with the Stooges. And I honestly wouldn't mind watching a movie just about the two of them. I think it works pretty well. So Around the World in a Daze has some foibles, has some strong points. At the end of the day, I think it falls squarely in the middle of a Stooges ranking. Don't you think it's about time for a Western? The final sort of true blue Three Stooges starring vehicle was 1965's The Outlaws is Coming. Today, The Outlaws is Coming is probably best remembered for starring Adam West, shortly before he biffed and bammed his way onto our screens as Batman. Indeed, Adam West had actually had several major film appearances, notably a brief, very depressing supporting role in The Young Philadelphians back in 1959. But here he plays the juvenile male lead opposite the Stooges, and honestly does, I'd say, a pretty good job, in his casting being one of the highlights. He's not my personal favorite of the juvenile male leads, but he's up there pretty high. You might remember when I reviewed this Blu-ray box set, I noted that most of the shorts that mentioned or mocked or depicted Native Americans were removed. No Whoops, I'm an Indian, no Back to the Woods, no Rockin' Through the Rockies, and some of those, especially Back to the Woods, kind of difficult to justify today. They don't exactly depict Native Americans in a very positive light, put it that way. The Outlaws is Coming kind of follows that example, so I was somewhat surprised when I saw it on the Blu-ray box set, because the depictions are, admittedly, not great. They're probably the most dated aspect of the film, barring maybe a couple little pop culture references, but for the most part, yeah, that's not exactly a comfortable watch for today's sensibilities. Murray Alper, a frequent Three Stooges supporting player in the 50s, played the Indian chief. He does a pretty good job, but his son, Charlie Horse, is played by Henry Gibson, a very young Henry Gibson, long before Robert Altman's Nashville or his depiction of the Nazi commander in the Blues Brothers. Illinois Nazis. I hate Illinois Nazis. Anyway, that's beside the point. The Outlaws is Coming does have some really fun slapstick gags, including Emil Sitka in a triple role where he gets to do all kinds of wacky hijinks. There's a lot of stuff involving gunfights, pouring glue down guns, and so on. Very interesting bits there, and the Stooges, you know, they fit pretty well into a Western setting. They'd done enough Western short films, well, Larry had anyway, that they were probably pretty used to, you know, what this genre would expect of them, and Curly Joe fits in pretty well. So Adam West's character is asked to head out west there to cover, you know, this big crime spree going on involving illicit sale of arms to Native Americans, involving arch criminals shooting up whole towns and driving the law out, and so on. And of course they meet up with Annie Oakley, played by Nancy Kovac, and she helps them save the day by foiling the villains, one of whom is played by Mort Mills, best remembered as the state trooper in Psycho. But yeah, it's a simple premise, but the Stooges do milk it for what it's worth, and a strong supporting cast really helps them out here. There's also a joke about the Beatles, which I laughed at, and then afterwards thought how surreal it was that someone could have gone to the theater and seen the movie Help, and also seen this, which feel like they're made in two completely different galaxies, that kind of thing. But pretty fun stuff. In this case, a Japanese man with a Beatle haircut is playing a song on his guitar. But anyway, that's beside the point as well. Outlaws is Coming does deliver on a lot of the shenanigans and hijinks that it promises. Probably the most notable thing today is that most of these big-time outlaws, you know, Johnny Ringo and Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp and all these other classic Western characters that a million things have been done with, were played by individuals who hosted Three Stooges TV programs, usually geared at kids, in respective areas around the U.S. They did some sort of casting call and rounded them up, Indeed, one is played by Joe Bolton, who hosted a New York City children's show that played cartoons and Stooges shorts. He popped up briefly as Officer Joe in Stop, Look, and Laugh, so it's nice to see him actually get a chance, though, to act here, and all these actors come out in their cowboy garb, shooting up towns and causing mischief, that sort of thing, ultimately to be foiled and then converted to the side of good by the Stooges. But it is pretty interesting stuff, and for some reason there's a prolonged catfight scene between Sally Starr, who plays Belle Starr, and Nancy Kovacs' Annie Oakley that feels more like it was imported from a Russ Meyer film. Don't know what that was all about, but anyway, besides a few dated gags and a few offbeat bits, I highly recommend The Outlaws is Coming. Yeah, it's aged, but it's kind of a swan song for the Stooges, really their last major starring thing. They could have done a lot worse and just phoned it in. Instead we get something that's kind of creative and kind of fun, even though it works with a very basic, relatable premise. I find The Outlaws is Coming to be very rewarding. And last but not least, you chowderheads, my favorite of the Three Stooges 1960s feature films, directed by veteran Three Stooges filmmaker Edward Burns, Three Stooges Meet Hercules. Now I might be a tad biased in this because I went to a Three Stooges convention where this was the theme and managed to procure autographs of stars Samson Burke and Quinn Redeker. Quinn Redeker even wrote Alex, very best, before signing it. Both super nice guys. Quinn Redeker passed away a couple years ago, sadly, very missed. He was in one of my favorite Best Picture winners, Ordinary People. And my mom actually got a chance to talk about soap operas he'd starred in with him. But anyway, that's beside the point, because Stooges Meet Hercules, despite my own personal bias, does indeed stand as a very strong Three Stooges feature film. The Stooges end up going back in time, thanks to their friend Skylar, played by Quinn Redeker, inventing a time machine, and he turns from a really nerdy guy into a Hercules substitute and ends up fighting the real Hercules, played by Samson Burke. And it's a wacky plot, but honestly one that kind of feels more original than something like The Outlaws is Coming. Kind of stands out in that regard. It's a fun movie to watch too. Marlon and Mike McKeever, both NFL players, appear as the two-headed Cyclops. There's some funny gags involving tranquilizer pills that Curly Joe has invented. Indeed, unlike Have Rocket Will Travel, this film actually thought, how can we make Curly Joe different than Curly? You know, what sorts of things can we add in? And I like that too. They took kind of a different approach. Now, yes, there are some very crappy effect shots. Indeed, the shot of the Cyclops picking up Mo is a pretty bad effect, and there's definite gratuitous use of stock footage when the time machine is traveling through different time periods and so on, and kind of, lame stock footage from different movies that had been probably much better than this one. But Stooges Meet Hercules works due to the strength of its cast. Vicky Trickett, who had only a tiny acting career, is one of the best female leads, I would say, in one of the Stooges feature films. And both Samson Burke and Quinn Redeker get in on the slapstick. We don't have too many frequent Stooges supporting players popping up here and there. Emil Sitka does a little tiny bit, especially as a confused shepherd and so on, but really nothing of great substance. But this movie kind of doesn't need that. It actually manages to stand on its own. Edward Burns knew what he was doing, worked really well on it, and I think at the end of the day, if you're looking for kind of a Stooges in a different setting, we don't see them in ancient Greece or Rome very often, I think this one actually delivers pretty well on that premise. And yeah, it's a little hokey, a little on the cheap, but the gags make it worth it there. George Neese, of course, is the villain. He also played one of the Martians in Stooges in Orbit. Stooges Meet Hercules, still my pick for the best of their starring feature films. So please comment your favorite Three Stooges feature film below. Someday we'll get to the ones that feature Curly or Shemp, talk more about Gold Raiders, talk more about Time Out for Rhythm and so on, but I thought this would be a fitting end to our discussion of their 1960s work. Please do comment below with your favorites, and we'll have some album reviews coming up soon for you. Hope you'll be there for those too, including the anniversary of the LA Light album. Hope to see you there for that. Till then, my friends, spread out!